Hi, this is Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, also the founder of the 2019 movement. I want to share a couple of thoughts with you. I had to finish my last video. My computer died on me, so I had to restart this. So I'm going to start from the beginning in case you missed part of the other part of the video. So anyway, I was sharing with you guys, many people talk about this whole idea of white supremacy and what it means. And I like to describe white supremacy as it's like the sleight of hand trick, so if you have a magician and a magician on a trick, right? So over here, he's doing all these big gestures and he's moving his hand around. But what you don't see is what he's doing with this hand, right? The sleight of hand trick. And so that's what white supremacy is. White supremacy is like a distraction. It keeps people, it stirs up emotions. They pass it off as though it's a real thing. And I'm going to break it down for you to tell you who the real culprits are. It's not white supremacy, especially with Black people, because Black Americans, especially because many of us haven't been healed through the multi-generational trauma that we've experienced through slavery, through some of the brutality of the past, through Jim Crow and all those type of things. Because many of us haven't been completely healed, then we're easily provoked, right? We're provoked in our emotional sphere. Every time they say white supremacy, or every time they show you an image of a white cop and a Black male, then it provokes us, and it's hard for us to get over that. We can't look at things logically, and we don't do a lot of research to find out what's really going on, what's really behind the scenes. We just take mainstream media's narrative at face value. So let me tell you who the real culprit is. It's not white supremacy. Okay. So this goes all the way back. There are 13 families, they call themselves bloodline families, the families of what they call, some people may call the Illuminati, or whatever the case may be. But you have to understand that they go back, they believe, and I'm talking about their philosophy, the people that are part of these families and these organizations that I'm going to briefly mention, they believe that they go back to Cain, that early on, the biblical account of Cain and Abel. And so if you are familiar with the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, right, you had the serpent, and the serpent came there and he gave secret knowledge, or he gave knowledge to Adam and Eve. This is their narrative. They believe, the Bible says that the serpent came and convinced Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So that word knowledge comes from the Greek word gnosis. And so Gnosticism is primarily the theology or ideology, if you will, of these organizations, but they believe they go back that far. Now, the biblical narrative and the narrative of the Luciferians, the globalists, the cabal, if you will, it's the same story, but they tell it from a different perspective. And I've said this before. And when you get a chance, please subscribe to my channel, like the video, share it if it's beneficial to you, if you can learn something from it. If you think it may be edifying to someone else, please do so. We're finally over 1,000 subscribers, so things are really moving, and we just want to get information. I just want to get truth out. I'm not trying to build a platform necessarily. I'm just trying to speak the truth that God has given me to speak. So anyway, when you think about that narrative, everything is inverted when it comes to these people. When it comes to those who follow Lucifer, the devil, the serpent, if you will, everything is inverted. So they believe the story of Adam and Eve, but they do it from a different perspective. So the biblical account is that Yahweh, God who created everybody and everything, and created Adam and Eve, put them in the garden, and he told them not to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Right. So the serpent comes and tells them, basically, when you eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, then you can be gods. You can be gods, and you can determine what's right and what's wrong. Right. So the biblical account is that the serpent is evil. The Gnostic account is that Yahweh was the evil one, and he was trying to suppress knowledge from Adam and Eve. So that basically they believe that Adam and Eve were gods, but Adam and Eve lost the understanding that they were gods because Yahweh was trying to deceive them. And so that fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil is what brought them into awareness that they were gods, right? So this is the premise for what they believe, right? Everything the enemy does is an inversion of what God does. In Isaiah 14:12-14, he talks about he will ascend above the clouds. He will be like the Most High, right? And this is Lucifer talking. Now, where we get the word enlightenment or Illuminati from is that in Hebrew, the word for Lucifer is the light bearer or light bringer or the lightened one, right? So They believe that that knowledge that the serpent gave to Adam and Eve illuminated them to know who they really were, and it is based on the secret knowledge that they possess, right? So the people, the organization we're talking about, this the real ruling elite, if you will, not white supremacy, but the real ruling elite are people that believe that they are either born into these bloodline families or that they have the secret knowledge that makes them as gods, and they are meant to rule over the earth. Okay, now where I talk about the inversion at is because if you know in the Bible, you have the children of Israel and you have 12 or 13 families, depending on how you count them. You can have 13 families or tribes of Israel, right? Tribes, 13 tribes. And so inversely, this organization, these global elite, have 13 bloodlines. They have 13 bloodlines, and they believe that they are descendants of Cain. They are the serpent seed. And just so you know, if you want to do your research, the 13 bloodline families are the Freeman family, the Russell family, the Reynolds family, the Onassis family, Bundy, Rockefeller, Van Dunn, Lee family, L.I., Rothschild, DuPont, Kennedy, I think I said Bundy already, Astor, Collins, and the 13th is the Merovingian family. Now, another interesting thing, when we talk about the Kennedy family and the Onassis family, which are some of the bloodline families, that's why many people say that JFK was chosen to be president, and because he went off the script of the international bankers, this is what the theory is. Because if you know that JFK was going to take the power away from the Federal Reserve, which is part of the global economic, the economics is the Rothschild family is the international globalist banking cabal. But anyway, because he was taking power away from the Federal Reserve and giving it back to the United States Congress, which is our Constitution says Congress is the one that's supposed to print money. But because of the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, and then after the collapse of the United States economy, after the stock market crash in 1929, the Federal Reserve seized control of our economy, and they're the ones that print money and they loan it to the United States government. That's why all your dollar bills, if you have one in your pocket, look at it, it says Federal Reserve note on the top of it. Okay, but I've talked about that in previous videos, so go back through it and you can see what I'm talking about. So anyway, they believe in the part of these 13 families. Oh, the reason I was talking about Kennedy and Onassis is because if you recall, when JFK was assassinated, his wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, married an Onassis. So that her name ended up being Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis. So she was married into two bloodline families, which I thought was very interesting. So anyway, these 13 families are the ruling elite class of the global cabal. Now, underneath them, there are organizations that they have, and these organizations do their bidding, right? You have to swear allegiance to these organizations. Some people take a blood oath. Some people, they say there's other types of ways that they take oaths. So you have a lot of organizations like the Bilderberg Group, the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and I could go on and on. The Club of Rome. These are some of the organizations that are carrying out the agenda of the global elite. So anyway, so you have to be part of the bloodline family, or you have to be part of one of these organizations. And in return, you get fame and fortune, right? So these families are very wealthy. The Rothschild family is considered one of the wealthiest families in the world. All these families are, like unimaginable riches that they possess. And there are other families too that they've married into. Like, for instance, people say that the Vanderbilt family, if you're familiar with the Vanderbilts, they were very, very wealthy. And as a matter of fact, Anderson Cooper's mom is Gloria Vanderbilt, the designer, and that they're part of the bloodline families of the 13. And so anyway, you have these 13 families. It's an imitation of God, and they carry out this thing. So these are the people that really, really believe that they are the ruling elite class, and all the rest of the families of the earth are subpar. They use racism as one of the many distractions to keep people fighting, and they don't care. They don't consider themselves white as popularly described as white. They really don't care about white people or black people or any other race of people. They only care about their agenda and their group of people. And so they carry out their agendas as a way to control the masses. So If you get a chance, there's a book by Dr. John Coleman called The Committee of 300, and it was written in 1993. I have a copy of that book, and I've read through it. Dr. John Coleman's The Committee of 300 that was written in 1993, and he lays out the 21 goals of the New World Order. And so I'll just share a couple of them with you. And the reason I'm saying that, because if you know the recent inauguration of Joe Biden, and he began to sign a lot of executive orders very quickly, right? Very quickly. And people were saying, man, he's really moving fast. The reason he's moving so fast, he's carrying out this globalist agenda. Just very clear. When I read a couple of these points that they make, you may understand it a little bit better. But their goal, it was first called Agenda 21 for the 21st century, which we're in. Then they changed it to Agenda 2030 because they wanted to have their agenda fully manifested or fully completed by the year 2030. We're in the year 2021. And so one of the things that happened is they had President Obama, and whether you like him or not, he was really carrying out a lot of these goals. You had before him Bush and Clinton, they were carrying out this globalist agenda as well. But then you had, they expected Hillary Clinton, which the Clintons are very much part of this global conspiracy. And some people have speculated, I've heard this before. I'm not telling you that this is a fact, but it makes a lot of sense that, Bill Clinton talked about his mother, but he never really knew his father. It was reported that his father may be a Rockefeller. He may be the illegitimate child of the Rockefeller family, which would make him one of the global, bloodline families. But anyway, I digress. So, and like I said, that's speculation. I don't have any way to prove that, but it would make sense. But so anyway, you had Hillary Clinton that was pegged to be president. She would have carried this out and, hopefully cross the finish line with its globalist agenda. But now you have this renegade by the name of Donald Trump, and he comes in and he not only starts to talk against their globalist agenda and openly speak against it, but then he starts to sign laws and executive orders that actually went against their very strategy that they were employing. And so I'm going to read to you a couple of there's 21 points that this guy outlines. I'm going to read a couple of them. And when you hear these, and when you look at what is actually happening, it should give you better insight. And just for the record, mainstream media, most of the high-ranking mainstream media executives, the ones that own it or run the various, whether it's CNN, Fox News, or CNBC, or any of these mainstream media outlets, they're controlled. 95% of the media is controlled by 6 companies, and these companies all are part of this globalist conspiracy. So when you hear the things that the agenda that's being promoted and how they support the agenda, and anybody who goes against it, they say it's dangerous, or this person is crazy, or some kind of conspiracy theorist, or whatever. But anyway, from the book, The Committee of 300, written in 1993, John Coleman, he says these are some of their goals. I'm not reading them all, just a few of them. One is to establish a new world order, which we talk about, a one-world governmental system, the New World Order. And it's actually on the back of your dollar bill. If you look on the back of your dollar bill, it says Novus Ordo Seclorum. That means New World Order. And like I said, those dollars are Federal Reserve notes. The Federal Reserve is part of this globalist conspiracy, right? New World Order. When you look at the pyramid on the back of it, that's not completed, but you see the all-seeing eye. That goes back to Genesis 11, because like I said, these bloodline families believe that they go all the way back to Genesis 4, actually. Genesis 3, Genesis 4 is the story of Cain and Abel. They believe that Cain is the progenitor of these globalist families. So anyway, Genesis 11 is when Nimrod, who was a descendant of, they believe, the serpent seed, was building a tower, as the Bible tells us. But then God came down, Yahweh came down, saw what they were doing, dispersed them, confounded their languages so that they could no longer complete this tower, right? So now they're trying to complete what they started in Genesis 11, which is why it's right there in plain sight on the back of your dollar. But to establish a new world order is what they're trying to do. They destroy all national identity and national pride. That's one of their goals. So if you look in the media, if you say someone's a nationalist, or like President Trump said, make America great, or put American interests first, they kept promoting the idea that that was evil. They keep telling you that if someone is a nationalist, or if they are patriot, or if they put America's interests first, they're trying to equate that with racism and white supremacy. And that's a lie. That's a deception. They're doing that intentionally because, like I said here, one of their goals is to destroy all national identity and national pride. So if you take pride in America, if you're a patriot, if you are a nationalist, see, a nationalist is someone who has ideology that opposes globalism is looking for a one world governmental system. A nationalist is someone who wants strong individual nations. And so they're trying to psychologically, they do psyops and they do social engineering to make you believe that those things are evil. Another one of their goals is to legalize the use of drugs and make pornography an art form, to make pornography an art form, and to legalize drugs, because they believe that that erodes the moral character and fiber of individuals and makes them easier to control. That's why if you look in music, if you look in movies, if you look in everything, it becomes increasingly more pornographic, and they're passing it off as normal. Even how people dress, and they are trying to convince the public that if you're against that, it's because you're prude, you're trying to you're legalistic, you're trying to tell a woman what to do with her body, if you tell a woman not to bear everything. So that's one of the use of drugs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the use of drugs and how important it is to understand that as well, because that has been something that they have done throughout the centuries. Another one is to weaken the moral fiber of the nation and demoralize workers, creating mass unemployment. Now, we know that with the pandemic, which I believe, I'm not saying that COVID isn't real, but this pandemic was something that was initiated by those who have the globalist ideology, because the first thing they did is they shut down everything. In order to make small businesses go away, people lost their jobs, people will be economically strapped. That's one of the goals that they wanted to do. And when you think about the statistics, if you're under 70 years old, you have a 99.9, I think it's 7% chance of surviving COVID. 99.97% chance to survive it if you're under 70 years old. And if you're over 70, I think it was 95 or 96% chance of surviving it. But yet they shut the whole world down, even though the COVID doesn't have a higher mortality rate than the common flu. And that's all. You can look that up and look at those numbers. But they promoted fear as a way to get everybody to shut down, ultimately to try to cause an economic collapse, which is the next point, to cause a collapse of all world economies. Because if all the world economies collapse, then they will be absorbed into this one world economic system, which is like the Bible says that you'll have to take the mark of the beast and you won't be able to buy or sell unless you take the mark. Another point that they're trying to implement is to give the fullest support to supranational institutions such as the United Nations, the IMF, and different things like that. So going back to this recent Biden inauguration, he said he's going to put us back on the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, which is a part of the United Nations, the Paris Climate Accord, which is part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Program. So all these things are globalist, part of the globalist agenda. Another one is to control education in America. They've done a great job at trying to control education in America. Now let's talk a little bit about the drug trade. Now, one of the ways that they have traditionally made money is through the drug trade. I would say to you that this current opioid epidemic is not something that is just by happenstance. It is par for the course of their agenda. So let's talk about it historically. You have this company called the Russell Company. And hey, Charlene Morris, how you doing? Russell and Company was one of the families that helped to find Skull and Bones, Yale Skull and Bones, right? They were very much involved with Yale University. So back, I think it was the 18th century, if I'm not mistaken, the Russell Company were exporters, and they gained a lot of wealth from exporting opium from Turkey into China. If you know about the British ruled China for a while. You had the Boxer Rebellion that occurred because what happened is China was trying to gain its independence from England, from Great Britain. And so in order to kind of subdue the Chinese people from fighting back against the British, they flooded the streets of China with opium. And they got it from Turkey, right? So they flooded the Chinese streets with opium, and it kept them from being able to overthrow the British, right? Now you'll see a pattern as I go through this. And then if you look in the 1960s and 70s, you have heroin that floods the streets of America, especially in the black neighborhoods. So in Harlem and different places like that, you had a heroin epidemic. Now, interesting enough is that during that time, we are in the Vietnam War, what's known as the Golden Triangle, and the United States Army is in Vietnam. And in case you didn't realize it, back then, the #1 exporter of poppy seeds, which is how you make opioid products, and heroin is one of the byproducts of opioid, opioid production, opium. The #1 exporter of poppy seeds during that time was Vietnam, right? Our army is in Vietnam. And so somehow mysteriously our army occupying that area, but yet opium is flooding the streets of America again, especially in the black neighborhoods. Then you had in the 80s, you had the crack epidemic. There was a thing called the Iran-Contra controversy, if you know Oliver North and some of the other people. And so during that time, America was trying to fight against the rebels in South America, and they also was trying to do business with Iran. And so they made a deal where they allowed cocaine to come into America. Crack cocaine now starts to flood the neighborhoods and black communities, starting with Los Angeles and other parts of that. And we're involved in it, right? And it came out. It wasn't like it was a guess or speculation. It was uncovered that we were instrumental in allowing for the cocaine to flood into America, especially the crack that came into the black neighborhoods. Now, interestingly enough, and there's a movie with Tom Cruise is in it called American Made. He plays the pilot. It's based on actual events. The pilot who was helping to fly a lot of cocaine into America. And he was he had an air base in America in Mena, Arkansas. Mena, Arkansas is where he was landed. They would land the planes, the state of Arkansas, and then they would get redistributed into the streets of America. Interesting enough, there was a governor at the time by the name of Bill Clinton, who was the governor of Arkansas. So Bill Clinton would have been able to, he would have had to give permission for them to land these planes in Arkansas. George H.W. Bush is the president at the time. And for those of you who may not know, the Bushes are also came from Yale University, and they were part of Skull and Bones, like we talked about the founders, the Russell and Company, who got rich off of opium. George H.W. Bush was the former head of the CIA, and he was the president at the time. So he would have basically been able to oversee this operation. Bill Clinton is the governor of Arkansas. Now, sometime later, or soon afterwards, Bill Clinton becomes president. And it was interesting because for a while, Bill Clinton wasn't high up on the polls, and mysteriously somehow he comes up and he wins the election, becomes the president. Now, because he was governor, he would have known about the drugs coming into America and landing in Arkansas. He would have had to given the okay for an operation of that magnitude to take place in a state, right? He would have known where the drugs were coming from. So now he becomes president. He signs the Clinton crime bill that especially targets crack cocaine, right? The 1994 crime bill and the 3-strike rule, which, if you had your 3rd strike, some people, and I know one in particular, has life without parole, because of drug-related crimes. Now, interesting enough, also, he passes the crime bill. You find out that they're getting these kickbacks from privatized prisons. So they make private prisons, and there's many places have contracts with privatized prisons in America, where the government has to keep them occupied to a certain occupancy, or they had to pay a fine. So now here's another interesting twist to this. So you also have this person, because in order for a bill to get introduced, you have to have a congressman to introduce the bill into the Congress, and then it goes through the House of Representatives, the Senate, and then the president signs it off as law. So in order for that bill to get introduced, they needed a congressperson. So the 1994 crime bill was introduced by a senator from Delaware by the name of Joe Biden. And he makes this beautiful speech about how important it was to lock these people away for a long time. Also, Joe Biden was instrumental. I think it was the 1988 crack bill, which gave 2 or 3 times longer sentences to black people because of crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. And so anyway, you see this, it's like a full circle, right? So now they're flooding the streets of America with crack cocaine. It comes through government oversight, comes through Arkansas. Bill Clinton's the governor. George H.W. Bush is the president. And the reason I mentioned George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, is because his family that goes back to Skull and Bones, which the Russell and Company were the founders of. The Russell and Company are the ones who perfected drugs, exporting drugs and making money off of it in order to weaken communities. I'm going to say that again. In order to weaken communities, they flood the streets with drugs. And you guys may be familiar with the fact after the 60s and the 70s, the black community was getting increasingly stronger. But then when you have the crime bill and the crack epidemic, it weakened our community tremendously on several different levels. How did it weaken our community? It weakened our community, for one, because crack was one of the most addictive drugs out there, and it just decimated our community because it hit like a storm. And I know this, I was growing up during that time, saw it firsthand. Another part of this is because you have a lot of money being made, but because you have these crime bills and stuff that targeted crack cocaine dealers, which was primarily street dealers, and a lot of them were in the black community. These black males were getting locked up and getting super long prison sentences, which tore the family down, tore the community down, right? Because you no longer have males in the neighborhood, in the families, or they might have been addicted of drugs. And so it broke the family down. I mean, broke us down in many different levels. And when you look at modern culture, especially hip hop culture, most of it is based on the whole idea of the crack epidemic era, right? That wasn't our culture. Our culture wasn't about hustling and drugs and prostitution and everything. That wasn't our true culture. That is the culture that a lot of that comes from, this whole crack epidemic era, right? So that happens, right? But it's all based on economics. I need you to understand it's all about making money. They make money off of this stuff. They make money off of privatized prisons. They make money off of locking people up because they had for-profit prisons. The drug money, just like the Iran-Contra, was used for part of their foreign policy, because they couldn't give money to Iran. Congress wouldn't approve it, but they funneled the money through these drug transactions to where they were able to get weapons to the people in South America, and the money was going to Iran to help them with their revolution and some of the other things that happened over there in the Middle East. So let's go to the next time that happened. So now you have the opioid epidemic, right? And everybody's talking about the opioid epidemic. Heroin has made a comeback on the streets, and you have this other thing. Can't think of what it's called. This other drug, but anyway, opioids hits America again. And guess what? Coincidentally enough, guess where the United States military is at? Afghanistan. Guess who's the #1 exporter of poppy in the world right now? Is Afghanistan. And coincidence? Maybe not. I'm just putting the facts out there. People have to make their own conclusions, but I would say it was too much to be a coincidence. So, as I said, some of the objectives of the New World Order people is to weaken nations, especially collapse economies and the like. So you had a couple of things that the globalists were trying to push to destabilize the country. So, of course, NATO, the North American Treaty Organization, which was like a military thing. President Trump pulled us off of NATO because he said we were paying too much money. And ultimately, we were footing most of the bill. And amen, praise God. Most people America was footing the bill, right? So we come off of that. because we have the strongest military. We can protect ourselves. But now they start to pay their fair share, which will probably go away now. You have these trade deals like you had NAFTA and TPP. Now, North American Free Trade Agreement and the Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, both of them were taken, we're going back on them now. President Trump had taken them off of it. We're going back on there. And see, the goals of those two are to weaken the economy of the United States. And so North American Free Trade Agreement, and I'll tell you how it weakens it. So Mexico was considered almost a third world country. The economy is a lot weaker than the United States. So when you have these free trade agreements and you take away tariffs, what happens is it makes it cheaper for companies to outsource into these other countries. And so, for instance, back in the days, most vehicles were made in Detroit or Michigan or in the United States. With the NAFTA, North American Free Trade, these companies now can put factories in Mexico and pay a fraction of the cost to the workers there. And because there is no tariffs or taxes or any type of extra that they have to pay, it's more economical for them to put a factory in Mexico. Now, what does that do? That outsources jobs. So in Detroit, and I don't know if you've been there lately, Detroit was one of the highest economic, had the highest, back in the 50s and 60s, I believe it was, they had the highest economy in America. The auto industry was booming. You had jobs. They were paying very high salaries. And now if you go to Detroit, it looks like a ghost town because of these trade agreements like NAFTA. It was cheaper for GM and Ford and all these other companies to build plants in other countries and pay a lot cheaper for labor and materials and have it exported here because there were no tariffs to affect that. The TPP was the same way. That was with Asia, was similar to NAFTA. And that's why China was getting so wealthy, because there were no tariffs in China. Amen. Amen. There were no tariffs for China, right? And so these Chinese companies could go over them. It was almost like slave labor. And that's why Nike is a very interesting company, because Nike tries to take this moral high ground, which Nike had a bunch of sweatshops in China. I don't know if they still do. They used to make sneakers over there. And I know from firsthand knowledge, I had a person who was in the military over in Asia, and the sneakers that we bought over here in America for $100 and some, they could purchase them over there for $10 or $15. And because it was so cheap, such cheap labor, right? So the TPP, NAFTA, and these other trade agreements actually weakened the American economy, because not only did it, these companies got wealthy over outsourcing jobs. It takes away jobs from Americans with no type of punishment on these companies. Right. So when we did away with those agreements and started to bring jobs back in, and even when they had tariffs, so back a couple of years ago, Trump imposed tariffs on China, which levels the playing field, and it makes it more economical for these companies to build their factories in America and hire United States workers at a reasonable wage. Now, one of the ways that I know that it really hit me when I went to college at University of Pittsburgh, and people may know that Pittsburgh was a steel town for many years. It had a pretty high standard of living. When I went to college in 1985, I would go and I would pass all of these empty steel mills. Even in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, there was some steel companies that were here that all of them went away. Right? My grandfather used to work in a steel mill, but I remember going to Pittsburgh, and because I know they still have steel, I said, how come all these steel mills are being closed down? And someone told me something that shocked me. He says, because they export steel now from Asia, from Japan, and from other places. I said, well, that can't make sense. How could it be cheaper to export steel from halfway across the world than it is to make it here? But of course, that's part of the globalist agenda to weaken the economy and weaken the country. So if you weaken economies and weaken communities, then they can get absorbed in the new world order that they are proposing. So destabilize the country. When we talked about, one of the points was to give full support to supernatural institutions such as the United Nations, the IMF, and the like. And so now you see them, they're talking about us getting back on the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Accord, and all these things. These are all parts of the globalist agenda that's being laid out. And again, I'm reading this book from 1993, and he laid it all out. We see it right before our eyes. But again, because we're not understanding the overall strategy, and we're ignoring it, and we're listening to mainstream media who's feeding the globalist propaganda, we're getting distracted by things over here when really the enemy is over here doing a lot of damage to our community. And so I'm going to give you this last scripture as I bring it to a close, because Revelation talks about it. So when I'm talking about these things that I'm talking about I actually get the documentation, the historical writings, that study the history of how these things came to be. But most importantly, I go to the scriptures, because the scriptures has given us all the insight into all these things. So Revelation chapter 18, it talks about Mystery Babylon. I've been talking about Mystery Babylon for some time. Mystery Babylon, the mother of our harlots and the abominations of the earth. It finally the Lord comes down and he destroys this, right? After much turmoil and tumultuous times in the country, in the world. But Revelation 18:20 says, "Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. And a mighty angel took a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, Thus will with violence shall the great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And the voice of the harpers and musicians and pipers and trumpeters shall be heard no more in all thee, and no craftsman, and whosoever shall craft, he shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of the millstone shall be heard no more in thee." It also said, "By thy sorceries you have deceived the world." Now that word sorceries comes from the Greek word pharmakia. Pharmakia not only means witchcraft. So as I'm talking about the deception on the media and different things, they're deceiving you. That's a form of witchcraft, by deceiving people with words, right? Using divination and deceiving you with words. But also pharmakia is where we get the word for pharmaceuticals. And so one of the great deceptions is they're going to use pharmaceuticals in order not only to deceive you, but to control you. And ultimately, as I said, with the Paris Accord, it's about sustainable development, which means they want to keep the population below a certain number. And so all these things are part of the overall strategy that is being employed. And so we have to have our eyes wide open, not being deceived or taken advantage of by the enemy, because we know ultimately not only does God prevail, but in the meantime, we are to save as many people as we possibly can to keep them from falling victim to this wicked, devious scheme. And so anyway, this has been Joe Green, head pastor of St. Paul Missionary Baptist Church, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Please come and visit the church. Also the founder of the 2019 movement. Until next time, peace and blessings to you. I love you. Shalom, shalom.